I'd like to know about how both the magazines that you've worked for go about choosing writers. At the Monthly, our principle is just the best writers. You know, it's great to have new writers and young writers. It's great to have old writers, but they have to be the best writers. Now, the Atlantic Monthly, Ernest Hemingway, Mark Twain, Henry James, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, I mean, the list just goes on and on. Most of these people published their first stories in Atlantic Monthly. Nobody had heard of them before then. Are you finding new Ernest Hemingways and Albert Einsteins?
Well, I think so, but let me just ask you, have you found yourself taking a gamble on somebody who's totally unknown, and you just say, why not?
Yes, and in fact, you know, I do that about 100 times a week, and it very rarely comes up. That's the truth of it, that you very rarely find somebody new who is able to put it all together. Now, part of this, I think, and I'd like you to respond to it, is that we just don't have, again, an essay writing tradition in Australia. It's 800 words or a book. And so to put together an idea over 6 or 8 or 10,000 words is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And so we accept unsolicited submissions, and we read so many of them every week. We read all of them, and often we'll say, you know, if it's a pitch, you know, we'll be very happy to read it, and we jump on anything that was terrific. It doesn't happen very often, and I mean we've had a few. I mean Robert Forster, our music critic, who won the Pascal Award for Best Criticism in 2006. He was a rock star, and you know, he's turned out to be just the most beautiful, gifted critic. So you know, it happens from time to time, but not very often.
On the one, as you say, it doesn't happen very often. On the other hand, it's part of your obligation as an editor to be on the lookout for these kinds of people. So it's a real mismatch of the amount of effort that you have to put into it versus the amount of gain that in fact you'll get. But I know that at Vanity Fair, at the Atlantic, at the Monthly, we're always trying to look for those new voices, because they're always coming into existence. By definition, all of the great voices that you've just mentioned were once unknown voices.
And some editor got to read their work for the first time, and gosh, you wouldn't want to reject it, would you?
The Atlantic Monthly rejected Emily Dickinson.
That's so comforting.
So mistakes happen.
Yeah.
There's a book that you mention in one of your recent issues, in one of your book roundups. It's called Atomic Bazaar by William Langewiesche. And William Langewiesche is now a Vanity Fair writer, but he's an example of someone who was plucked from what we call the slush pile. Do you have a name for those?
Yeah, slush pile, same. Unsolicited contributions.
Over the transom is another word. In fact, this building actually has transoms, I think. But William Langewiesche began as a pilot. He had an air taxi service that along the U.S.-Mexican border, and Lord only knows what he was actually doing. And but he made his living as a professional pilot. But he was also writing privately on the side. And when he would take vacations, he would go to places like Algeria and fly around the Sahara. So one day, I received in the mail, this was probably 1987 or so, an unsolicited manuscript about the experience of flying in the Sahara, and with extraordinary stories of danger and adventure and things that had happened to people who tried to cross the Sahara, and it had a little bit of Saint-Exupéry in it too, because he flew. It was a really remarkable thing. It's the kind of thing you live for. And so I actually did call him up, and and he now is, I mean, he's a major writer of what is sometimes called literary non-fiction.
Atul Gawande would be like Gawande, the Indian doctor who writes a lot for the New Yorker and elsewhere. He was a surgeon who writes, wonderful essays for the New Yorker on the sort of anthropology of medicine and other such things. People that come from unexpected places often are, the best writers.
Well, that's what we're saying about, so much of this is amateur hour. Why should the, in a society where people are doing interesting things in all sorts of dimensions, why should publications that are meant to reflect society actually only be written by people that come from one sliver, journalists? So, no, I'm glad that we get these people coming from all walks of life. It really keeps things alive. What keeps you up at night when you think about your magazine? I mean, there are little things that will keep you up, such as will this piece come in, and why does that writer have to be such a jerk?
You think they're little things, do you?
But no.
Will that piece come in? That's the thing that almost gives me coronary. But yes, go on to the big things.
What are the big kind of issues that trouble you about the future of this kind of genre?
Well, I don't feel at all troubled about the genre. I think that monthly magazine doing what we're aiming to do is it is here to stay in Australia. I have no doubt about that. In terms of my own, what keeps me awake in being the editor of the monthly at this point in its history is that you lose the vision, you lose the sort of, the ability to tap into what's going to matter. I mean, that it doesn't keep me up at night, but it's always there with every edition. And sometimes, I noticed something I read about the Atlantic Monthly was that you're very good keepers of your history, and that there are, if in doubt about throwing some bit of paper away or framing it in the offices, it would always be framed. And I think the monthly, even though we're a little bit younger, we're very respectful of our own history as well. And I mean, sometimes what I do to allay that fear is that we have all our covers up on the walls in our office, and by looking at them all, they tell a story now over almost 3 years. And when we look at it, I think we feel very confident that the major issues and the temper of the nation over that time, that story is being told. So I guess the sort of big fear is that you lose the ability to understand what that might be. We're in a wonderful and exciting time in our magazine at the moment because we've had a change of government, and last year was an election year. Again, a difficult thing for a monthly publication, to how you approach that. And now it's exciting because there's a new government and things do change, and it energises you, as does an election year. And so I guess it's just getting it right and understanding, having confidence and courage to find and publish stories that work and that move people or change people or inform them in that is a constant source of a responsibility.
You raise an issue that reminds me of a problem. At least I hope it's a looming problem, but it's what there's often a disconnect between what's good for society and what's good for magazines. It's great for magazines to have a really rotten government. And because it gives you wake up in the morning and with a smile on your face because there's something new to do, and at times of if Lord knows if we ever elect a Pericles in the United States, it's just going to be terrible for the news business. Vanity Fair has been assiduous in picking over the Bush administration. We think of it as this kind of rotting carcass, and every morning, we send the vultures out for more. But but then suddenly, you may wake up with a government that you really admire. That it changes what you're going to do as a journalist. I mean, you're not going to. Of course, you're going to criticize anything that needs criticizing, but it may be that there's actually less objectively to criticize, and I can foresee, at least, and I hope that we will be facing this situation before long, and but it's going to require then rethinking. So, what should we focus on now? Not that there aren't major problems that you can, but you've got to rethink. So have you gone through a process where you've had to kind of redefine what your big targets are?
I mean, I think, as you've just said, a lot of the stories are ongoing, but they've got a different perspective to them now. So we're still in Iraq. We've still got unspeakable problems with Indigenous communities in Australia, but the new government is coming at them in different ways. I mean, I think what it allows is for the monthly to really breathe and look at ideas, at not having to focus, on this set of problems that we perceived were there with the Howard government, over the whole time of our existence. It leaves room, I hope, for political ideas and, as you say, criticism. I mean, the monthly's not left or right. We're for good government. We're for great government. We're independent, and so we want to always, use that to its maximum. And so to me it's about ideas in politics now, and wondering where we could go now that we don't have a government that does certain things that, from our perspective, were just wrong.
Vanity Fair happens to be somewhat more partisan than, at least in the editor's notes and so on, and sometimes in our choice of stories, than the Atlantic Monthly was. The Atlantic Monthly, I think you would fairly position as somewhat left of centre.
Look, we've been positioned in that way too. We had covers last year with, John Howard, every time best-selling. Every time we put him on the cover, exit right, corrosion of character. But we are independent, and we'll publish whatever needs to be. But yeah, and, I wouldn't want to mislead you that we were.
No, you weren't. But it creates a little bit of a problem, though. Even though the Atlantic Monthly is a little bit left of center, we actually were very open to ideas from the right. One of the biggest sellers ever in the history of the magazine was an article called "Dan Quayle Was Right," and the title came from an episode of a program called Murphy Brown, and Murphy Brown was, I don't know whether you had it here, but
we did.
She had decided to have a child, out of wedlock, and Dan Quayle said, actually, this is, if you look at things statistically, this actually is a problem, and the article that we published was by a terrific sociologist named Barbara Defoe Whitehead, the sister of William Defoe, the actor. And she had actually...
Met him? Have you met him?
No, he was with George Clooney when I didn't meet Clooney. And she went through all the sociological literature, simply pointing out that no matter, of course, the broad statistics say nothing about individual families and circumstances and so on. But statistically, the single-parent family households don't have as much money, and there are all sorts of ramifications. So the article Dan Quayle was right. It kind of helped our relations with the right wing for years to come. But it becomes a kind of a problem, though, with a magazine like Vanity Fair in terms of access.
Yeah.
If you are going to be taking on Dick Cheney and the Iraq War and so on and so forth, issue after issue after issue, those people stop returning your calls. And
so you don't think that Vanity Fair photographers will be able to get McCain in sort of fishnets with, for a forthcoming fabulous cover?
Well, we actually did do a good McCain story, and the one advantage we have at Vanity Fair is the photographers. We never, ever, ever make anybody look bad. And so no matter what the text says, the picture is going to be fabulous. And I mean, there's a reason why we have the word vanity in the title.
We try not to. We really do. I mean, might be a few more handsome politicians in your part of the world, I'm not sure, but I think the last time anybody looked really bad on the monthly cover was Alan Jones, and it was just too big a task. But access is a problem. I mean, I have tried since I published the Kevin Rudd essay to get Malcolm Turnbull to write the equivalent essay on the Republic. I've rung his office countless times. I'm like a serial stalker, offering exactly the same deal. And I think it's an equivalent difficulty for Rudd to have written about Christianity. I think that it's the equal challenge for Malcolm Turnbull to write about the Republic, and I think it's something many people would love to read. And by the equivalent, it's got to be honest. I mean, I think that whatever you think of the Prime Minister, I really think what he wrote in his Faith in Politics essay he meant, and that's why it was so good. I would like to know exactly what Malcolm Turnbull thinks about the Republic. I happen to think he's probably the smartest guy in the room on that side of the building at the moment, and he could probably write well enough to do that. And so sometimes though, you can't convince them to do it.
Let me ask you something it's not really about the craft of journalism and editing, but it's so important, and yet probably people don't think of it, and that is who owns you. It's so important. These journalistic enterprises like monthly magazines are very expensive to run. I mean, the amount of the resources required are just mind-boggling. And often they are not, they are not cash cows. They're not making lots and lots of money. In fact, frequently they're losing money. So an essential ingredient, it's as essential as the people who are writing for you and taking your photographs, is to have an enlightened owner, whether it's a corporation or a person. And in the United States, there's a long history of people who have, for a variety of reasons, but most of them a certain kind of public spiritedness, have been willing to underwrite the cost of these sorts of magazines. There's, the Atlantic Monthly might have 500,000 subscribers, but they're not. The important thing is that there's one subscriber who's willing to pay $15 million for his subscription.
Yeah.
And Vanity Fair is a little different, but what is your circumstance there?
It's probably more, my circumstance here is that, we have an enlightened, what was your other word? Enlightened, energised, incredible.
Kind of Lorenzo de Medici.
Yeah, he's here too. So,
oh.
I mean, I think it's probably essential. I mean, one of the, but not just somebody who I mean, the monthly, I should say, is right on the cusp of breaking even at the moment. We're the fastest growing magazine in the country, and so worrying about whether or not this magazine can actually exist and become part of Australian history it's off our list of worries. It's fantastic freedom to think we're at a point where we know we can accept 2 and 5 year and hopefully lifetime subscriptions. That's a great thing. Our publisher, Maury Schwartz, comes from book publishing and loves magazines. He just loves them, and particularly the American ones, New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, and I think you can see it in his original vision for this publication. There are little nods of honour to these great publications. I think if you also look at the Bulletin, it thrived when it had an owner that loved it. You know, I don't think that's the whole reason about its demise, but but I don't know that an Australian magazine of this kind can actually exist without a publisher that really cares about it. So, I mean, we have complete independence editorially, but we also have a publisher who loves it, and that's a great thing. You know, he's always visiting, and every day. I mean, it's a really important part of the culture of our office and the culture of this magazine. And I can't imagine a silent, unenthused person just sort of writing checks.
Yeah, it is such an essential aspect. I sometimes wonder whether the business model for magazines that we've been living with for so long, and that was essentially invented at the turn of the last century, where you have advertising, which helps keep the price of actual publications down for magazines and newspapers, hasn't put us into a real bind, because people are accustomed to thinking that magazines should be cheap to buy, whereas people don't have that feeling about books. I mean, there's a threshold, of course, but books routinely cost $25 or $35. But when magazines, if a magazine actually set out to charge you what it costs as a product, people aren't used to actually paying that price and resist it. And I actually wonder whether magazines need to, bite the bullet and just simply say, you're buying one of the great quality products that is made in our civilization. And if you understood that, you probably would be willing to pay for it. But most magazines just don't have the courage of their conviction to say that.
Maybe, again, I think perhaps a monthly magazine, I don't know if there's a different, in fact, with the Atlantic Monthly and Vanity Fair, but I know a lot of monthly readers here, they keep the magazines. They like to keep them all and have a record of it. So in fact, it's not...
Maybe we should rent them then.
It can be disposable, a magazine can be, but not necessarily. And I mean, like, again, Vanity Fair and Atlantic Monthly, the Australian Monthly, we care about what it looks like and how it feels in the hand. It's got to be beautiful. Beauty is I think a really important part of a great magazine, as important as ideas and great writing. And so perhaps that's, that people who feel that they're actually buying something that they're going to, keep as a collection helps.
That's one of the beauty part is when I was sitting around last night just making some notes about possible points to go over, and you will see right there the word beauty.
There it is.
But the beauty part is so important, it's one of the reasons why this form, I think, is good for the long haul. A newspaper is not particularly beautiful, and it's easy to see how it could move onto the internet. But a well-done magazine is actually something that you want to have in your hands. There's a certain tactile quality to it, and something like Vanity Fair, where so much effort is put into the photography. These shoots that someone like Annie Leibovitz does are incredibly costly and time-consuming and so on.
Did you go to them?
No, I've never been to one. But when I can see what happens when one of my writers is in Peru or Africa or Iraq, and then we need to get a photographer assigned. I mean, just the amount of effort and money that it costs, but the results are extraordinary. And you want to actually have these produced on beautiful paper, but it makes it a product that's hard to replace easily. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Cullen. It's been just great to meet you.
Thank you very much.